You're listening to international investment advisor Doug Goldstein on the Goldstein on Gelt show, the financial show where we'll talk about how you can make the most of your money. With all the confusing financial chatter bombarding you each and every day, Goldstein on Gelt will give you the practical information you want and need about living a financially stable life. Here's your host, money maven Doug Goldstein.
Okay, we are here today with Itzik Ben David on the Rusty Mike radio station Goldstein on Gelt show. Itzik Ben David is the Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. He's responsible for international trade, and he's the chairman of the Israel Dairy Board. Now, there's been news recently that in fact may affect many people regarding the milk and cheese and all the dairy products that they get, because there was a bill that was brought up that is known as that is related to the Israel dairy industry in order to help imports come in. And maybe before we start with some of the questions, Itzik Ben David, if you could please just tell us, what's this bill about? What's the story that seems to be very hot in the press these days?
Well, in fact, this bill, it's an update of an older bill which exists already from 1992 with the aim of regulating the dairy sector in Israel. The scope of responsibility of the former law, of the former bill, is quite limited, and therefore we found that due to the very specific aspects of the Israeli dairy industry, there should be a more comprehensive and more focused legal basis, mainly for the daily operating of this sector, and also for regulating the government, the Ministry of Agriculture involvement in this sector. In fact, this is one of the two sectors in the agricultural sector, in the agricultural business in Israel, where the ministry and the government involvement is quite heavy.
I see. And when you talk about the involvement of the government, is that in terms of the business side or in terms of the health of the food, or is it both?
I would say both of these aspects. Our involvement, of course, but this is true for all agricultural sectors where we are not heavily involved. But our main involvement is through the regulation either of the regime quota, on the framework of which this sector is operating, and also as far as the regulation of prices, and this is one of the aim of the objectives of this law. I refer to the target price, which is been according to the farmers for their production.
So the government has a certain target price for dairy products that the government wants the market to achieve?
Yes, this is the case today. The target price is already paid today by the dairies to the farmers, but it is based on a common understanding. And due to some changes which occurred during the last 2-3 years in the dairy sector in Israel, I refer mainly to the privatization of the biggest dairy, Tnuva, which was a cooperative of farmers and which was privatized and bought by some private persons 2 years ago. We thought that it will be preferable to, as I said in the beginning, to review all the legal basis under which the dairy sector is operating.
Okay, so the idea of the bill is to help import dairy products. Aren't there already dairy products that are being imported up to
No, just a very short correction. The aim of the bill is not to regulate the import or the trade of dairy products. Let me sum up in very few sentences the main objective of the bill. Okay. First of all, the first objective is really to regulate under a comprehensive and exhaustive legal basis all the involvement of the ministry, the government, dairy sector, mainly regarding the allocation and the planning aspects, allocation of quotas and the planning aspect of this sector. As I mentioned earlier, the dairy sector is operating under a quota regime. The Minister of Agriculture is fixing each year the overall quota to be allocated to the farmers according to the foreseen demand for all dairy products. in Israel.
So the Ministry of Agriculture determines approximately, to the best of their ability, how much dairy will be required over the course of the year, and then sets that as a limit for how much production can be made by the dairy farmers?
Of course, yes. The overall quota, the national quota, is fixed according to the foreseen demand for all dairy products during a specific year.
Do we know how accurate these predictions are? Based on what they predict and what's the actual need at the end, when it's reviewed at the end of the year, are they usually right on?
No. We are fixing this. We are setting up this prediction of the overall demand for dairy products during the last months of each year, because the quota, the overall quota, has to be decided and published at the beginning of each year. At the 1st of January, everyone has to know already what is the overall quota, and the bill deals also of the ways how this overall quota will be allocated to the private farmers.
Could you explain why it's done that way, as opposed to, for example, just letting the market take charge? And
we think that the dairy sector is a very important sector in the Israeli agriculture. It concerns a very primary product which is consumed daily by all people in Israel, the whole population. And we think the volume of international trade in dairy product is quite limited, so we have to rely on a very high degree of self-sufficiency as far as the dairy sector is concerned. Beyond that, we think that the dairy sector is a primary sector which serves as a tool for the Minister of Agriculture in order to make the rural environment viable and to ensure a dispersion of the population along the peripheral area, mainly along the borders, and to assist farmers. It's also a sector which involves a very high level of capital, so we have to ensure the farmers that they get a return for their investments. This is a very sophisticated, highly technological sector, and therefore these are the main reasons for which we still maintain a quota regime. I would say that this is true also for many other Western countries. For example, all the countries in the European Union are operating in a similar way.
Mm-hmm. And are there protections that are set up for the farmers if, for example, there's a certain quota that's set up, but in fact the market does not buy that much, and then the farmers will...
This is the reason for the action of the dairy board. The dairy board takes charge of all the quotas which were allocated but not consumed on the domestic market. They are either stocked under the form of milk powder or butter, or partly, but this is done in very limited quantities, partly exported outside Israel. But this is the main aim of the dairy board, to ensure that all the quantities which are not consumed on the domestic market will not interrupt the regular trade on this market.
I see. So as a result of the reform or the bill that's come out,
yes,
both Tenuva and Strauss seem to be rather up in arms. Could you explain what their position is on this issue?
No, so before I respond to your answer, I would like to specify the other main objectives of this law. So first, to regulate on a sound legal basis the planning aspect of this sector, and to regulate the involvement of the ministry in this sector. The other objective is to ensure, in fact, that dairies will pay the target price to the farmers. Mm-hmm. And the third objective of the law is really to regulate the overall activity of the dairy board, since the dairy board is not operating under its specific law, like the poultry board in Israel, which operates under its specific law, or the horticultural board, which was a merger of some other boards, which also operates under its specific law. Now, coming back to your question, I think that the demand objection of the dairies, and especially Tnuva, I mentioned the beginning of our interview that Tnuva was privatized 2 years ago. They are, of course, favoring the fact that all the market, the trade and the production of dairy product will be based upon competition and the rules of the market. And it's a little bit different point of view from what we think in the Ministry of Agriculture.
I see. We are speaking with Itzik Ben David, the Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development, who's also the Chairman of the Israel Dairy Board. Let me just ask one final question. As a result of the changes, are regular consumers who go into the grocery store to buy dairy goods, will we see any difference, or are the changes that this bill are making are really more internal to the dairy industry?
I think, as you said, it's more internal to the industry. There will be no change, foreseen changes as far as domestic consumption is concerned. And more specifically, there were some concerns which were raised by some importers, by some foreign countries which are trading with Israel. There will be no change whatsoever on the international trade of dairy products. There is no way that this bill will affect our commitment, the commitment of Israel, which were taken in the framework of our bilateral or multilateral trade agreements. This bill will not affect this commitment whatsoever in no way.
I see. Itzik Ben David, Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Agriculture, I'd like to thank you very, very much for letting us know a little bit what's going on behind the scenes in the grocery store in the dairy industry. Thanks again.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye now.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.